Marcus had been walking for 3 days straight when he heard the scream. The sound cut through the morning mist like a blade, sending birds scattering from the towering pine trees that surrounded him. At 17, he had learned to trust his instincts, and every fiber of his being told him someone was in serious trouble. The backpack on his shoulders felt heavier with each step as he pushed through the dense undergrowth toward the source of the cry. Branches scratched at his weathered jacket, a donation from the children's home he had left behind 6 months ago. Marcus had grown tired of the system, tired of being shuffled from one foster family to another, each promising a fresh start that never materialized. The wilderness had become his refuge. He knew these mountains better than most seasoned hikers, having spent countless hours exploring every trail and hidden valley during his supervised outdoor activities at the group home. When he turned 18 in 2 weeks, he would officially age out of the system anyway. He had decided to start his adult life early, on his own terms. Another scream pierced the air, closer this time. Marcus quickened his pace, his hiking boots finding purchase on the rocky terrain with practiced ease. The cry was definitely human, and distinctly female. His heart pounded as he imagined what might be happening. These mountains weren't just home to deer and rabbits. Black bears roamed these woods, along with the occasional mountain lion. As he crested a small ridge, Marcus spotted movement through the trees below. A woman with long dark hair was pressed against a large boulder, her hands protectively covering her swollen belly. She was very pregnant, maybe 8 or 9 months, and her face was contorted with pain and fear. But it wasn't just the isolation and her condition that made Marcus's blood run cold. Circling the boulder with predatory patience were 3 coyotes, their yellow eyes fixed on the vulnerable woman. They moved with calculated precision, testing her defenses, looking for the perfect moment to strike. Marcus had encountered coyotes before during his solo camping trips. Usually they avoided humans, but these 3 looked different, desperate, hungry. Their ribs showed through their matted fur, and their movements carried the aggressive confidence of animals with nothing to lose. The woman spotted the largest coyote as it crept around the boulder's edge, getting ready to charge. Her scream this time was raw terror mixed with physical agony. She was having contractions. Without hesitation, Marcus dropped his backpack and grabbed the hiking stick he had carved from a sturdy oak branch. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all he had. He had no phone to call for help, no ranger station within miles, and no one who would even miss him if things went wrong. As he scrambled down the rocky slope toward the scene below, Marcus's mind raced through everything he knew about coyote behavior.
Make noise. Appear larger.
Never run. Never turn your back. Fight if cornered. The woman looked up as pebbles scattered down from Marcus's descent. Hope and disbelief flashed across her pain-stricken face as she saw the teenage boy rushing toward what looked like certain death. "Hey!" Marcus shouted at the top of his lungs, raising his walking stick above his head. "Get away from her!" The 3 coyotes turned their attention to this new threat. The largest, a scarred male with 1 torn ear, bared his teeth and let out a low growl. The other 2 flanked him, their hackles raised. They had been interrupted in their hunt, and they weren't pleased about it. Marcus reached the bottom of the slope and positioned himself between the predators and the woman. She was leaning heavily against the boulder now, one hand gripping the rock for support while the other clutched her stomach. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool mountain air. "Are you okay?" Marcus called over his shoulder, never taking his eyes off the coyotes. "The baby," she gasped between contractions. "It's coming. I was hiking when the labor started. My husband went for help, but that was hours ago." The lead coyote took a step forward, testing Marcus's resolve. The boy stood his ground, making himself as tall as possible and keeping his makeshift weapon visible. He had read somewhere that coyotes rarely attacked humans unless they felt cornered or were protecting young, but these 3 looked beyond normal behavior. "What's your name?" Marcus asked the woman, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sarah," she managed. "Sarah Coleman. I'm a nurse at the county hospital." Marcus filed that information away. If she was a nurse, she would know what to do when the baby came. But first, they had to survive the next few minutes. The scarred coyote let out a series of sharp yips, and the other 2 began to circle wider. Marcus realized they were trying to split his attention, force him to choose which direction to defend. It was a hunting strategy he had seen wolves use in nature documentaries. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "do you have anything we can use? Anything sharp or loud?" "My water bottle," she replied. her breathing becoming more labored. "And a whistle in my pack." "Where's your pack?" "I dropped it when they first appeared. It's about 20 feet to your left." Marcus glanced in that direction and saw a small day pack lying in the pine needles. The distance might as well have been 20 miles. The moment he moved toward it, the coyotes would close in. The largest predator took another step forward, and Marcus could see the desperation in its eyes. This wasn't just hunger driving the pack. They were starving, and a pregnant woman represented an easy meal they couldn't pass up. Marcus gripped his walking stick tighter and made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He charged toward the lead coyote, screaming at the top of his lungs and swinging his makeshift weapon in wide arcs. The sudden aggression caught the pack off guard. The leader jumped back, snapping at the stick as it whooshed past his snout. But the other two immediately moved to flank Marcus, just as he had feared they would. Behind him, Sarah cried out as another contraction hit her. The sound seemed to drive the coyotes into a frenzy. The one on Marcus's right lunged forward, teeth bared and aiming for his leg. Marcus spun and brought his walking stick down hard on the animal's back. The coyote yelped and rolled away, but it wasn't seriously injured. Now all three predators were thoroughly enraged, and Marcus found himself exactly where he didn't want to be, surrounded. The scarred leader locked eyes with Marcus for a long moment. In that gaze, the boy saw intelligence and calculation. The coyote was weighing its options, deciding whether this strange human was worth the fight or if easier prey might be found elsewhere. Then Sarah screamed again, and Marcus knew the baby was coming whether they were safe or not. Time was running out in more ways than one. He raised his walking stick high above his head and brought it down hard on a nearby rock, creating a sharp crack that echoed through the forest. The sound startled the coyotes, but only for a moment. "Come on then," Marcus whispered to himself, settling into a defensive stance he had learned during his brief stint in a foster home with an ex-military father. "Let's see what you've got." The attack came from 3 directions at once. Marcus swung his stick in a wide arc, catching the leader across the ribs and sending him tumbling, but the other 2 were already airborne, their teeth aimed at his arms and throat. This was the moment that would test everything Marcus had learned about survival, about fighting, and about what it truly meant to risk everything for a stranger. The battle for their lives was about to begin. Marcus twisted his body at the last second, causing the smaller coyote to sail past him and crash into a tree trunk. The other attacker's teeth grazed his forearm, tearing through his jacket but missing flesh by inches. The pain was sharp but manageable, and Marcus used the animal's momentum to grab it around the neck. For a terrifying moment, boy and beast wrestled in the dirt, rolling over pine needles and sharp rocks. Marcus could smell the coyote's rank breath and feel its powerful muscles straining against his grip. The animal's claws raked across his chest, shredding his shirt and leaving angry red scratches on his skin. The scarred leader recovered quickly from Marcus's first blow and circled around for another attack. But Marcus had learned something crucial in those few seconds of combat. These coyotes were weaker than they appeared. Malnutrition had sapped their strength, making them desperate but not necessarily deadly. Marcus released his grip on the coyote he was wrestling and rolled away just as its teeth snapped at his face. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his walking stick from where it had fallen. His left arm was bleeding now, and his chest burned from the claw marks, but adrenaline kept the pain at bay. Behind him, Sarah's breathing had changed. The gasps were closer together, more urgent. Marcus didn't need medical training to know that meant the baby was coming soon. "How much time do we have?" he called over his shoulder, while keeping his eyes locked on the 3 coyotes who were regrouping for another assault. "Not long," Sarah panted. "Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe less. 10 minutes." Marcus had to end this fight in the next few minutes, or Sarah would be giving birth while surrounded by hungry predators. The thought filled him with a rage he had never experienced before. He had spent his entire life being told he was unwanted, that he was just another problem for the system to manage. Foster families had sent him back for being too quiet, too angry, too damaged. Teachers had written him off as another troubled kid from a broken home. Social workers had processed his paperwork with tired efficiency. One more case in an endless pile. But here, in this moment, someone needed him. Not the system, not a family looking for the perfect child, not counselors trying to fix his problems. Sarah needed him, and he would not let her down. Marcus raised his walking stick and let out a battle cry that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul. The sound echoed off the mountain walls, primal and fierce. Even the coyotes paused, unsettled by the intensity of it. He charged the pack leader again, But this time, he was smarter about it. Instead of swinging wildly, Marcus thrust the pointed end of his stick like a spear. The sharp tip caught the coyote in the shoulder, and the animal howled in pain and surprise. The other two rushed in to help their packmate, but Marcus was ready for them. He spun in a tight circle, using his stick like a staff, striking first one and then the other. His movements were fluid now, driven by instinct and desperation. One of the smaller coyotes yelped and limped away into the underbrush, apparently deciding that this fight was more trouble than it was worth. The other hesitated, looking between its wounded leader and the fierce teenager who showed no signs of backing down. The scarred coyote tried one more attack, lunging low and going for Marcus's legs. But the boy was learning fast. He stepped aside and brought his walking stick down hard on the animal's spine. This time, the coyote didn't get up right away. The remaining predator looked at its injured packmates and made the smart choice. With a series of sharp yips, it called for retreat. The three coyotes melted back into the forest, their yellow eyes glinting one last time before disappearing into the shadows between the trees. Marcus stood alone in the small clearing, breathing hard and bleeding from multiple wounds. His clothes were torn, his body ached, and his hands shook from the adrenaline crash. But they were alive. Marcus. Sarah's voice was strained but filled with gratitude.
Thank you. I thought we were going to die.
He turned to face her and saw that she had slid down the boulder to sit on the ground. Her face was pale, and she was gripping her stomach with both hands. "The baby's coming now," she said, trying to stay calm despite the pain. "I need you to help me." Marcus dropped his walking stick and rushed to her side. "I don't know anything about delivering babies." "I do," Sarah said between contractions. "Just listen to me and do exactly what I say." She guided him through gathering supplies from her drop backpack, a small first aid kit, bottled water, and a clean towel she had packed for the hike. Marcus found himself following her instructions with the same focused determination he had shown during the fight. "We need to get me more comfortable," Sarah explained. "Help me lie back against this pack." Marcus positioned the backpack behind her and helped her recline. Her contractions were coming every 2 minutes now, each one making her grip his hand tight enough to bruise his fingers. "You're going to have to catch the baby," she told him during a brief pause between contractions. "When I tell you the head is crowning, you need to support it with both hands." The responsibility was terrifying. Marcus had fought off wild animals, but this was different. This was about creating life, not just preserving it. One wrong move could harm both mother and child. "I can see the head," Sarah announced, her voice tight with effort. "Get ready." Marcus positioned himself as she had instructed, his hands trembling slightly. He could see the tiny crown of the baby's head, covered in dark hair like its mother's. The sight filled him with an emotion he couldn't name, something between awe and terror. On the next contraction, support the head and shoulders, Sarah coached him. "Don't pull, just guide." The contraction hit, and suddenly Marcus found himself holding a tiny, slippery human being. The baby's head was in his hands, then the shoulders, and finally the entire small body slipped free. The infant was covered in blood and fluid, completely motionless and silent. For a heart-stopping moment, Marcus thought something had gone wrong. Then Sarah reached up and cleared the baby's mouth with her finger, and the tiny lungs filled with air. The baby's cry rang out across the mountainside, strong and clear and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Marcus whispered, staring down at the small face scrunched up in protest at being forced into the cold world. Sarah was crying now, tears of exhaustion and relief streaming down her face. "Give her to me," she said, reaching up with shaking arms. Marcus carefully placed the newborn on her mother's chest, using the towel to cover them both. The baby immediately quieted, responding to the familiar sound of Sarah's heartbeat. "You did it," Sarah said, looking up at Marcus with eyes full of gratitude and something else. Respect. "You saved us both." Marcus sat back on his heels, overwhelmed by what had just happened. In the span of an hour, he had fought for his life, defeated dangerous predators, and helped bring a new life into the world. The orphan boy who had been told he was worthless, who had been shuffled from home to home like an unwanted package, had just experienced the most meaningful moments of his existence. "What's her name going to be?" he asked, watching the tiny fingers curl around Sarah's thumb. "Hope," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Her name is Hope." The sound of voices in the distance made them both look up. Through the trees, Marcus could see figures approaching. A man in hiking gear followed by 2 park rangers with a medical kit and stretcher. "That's my husband," Sarah said, her voice weak but happy. He found help. As the rescue team approached, Marcus stood and stepped back. His part in this story was ending, and soon he would fade back into the wilderness where he belonged. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he had truly mattered. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with the unfocused gaze of the newly born. In a few hours, she would be in a warm hospital, surrounded by family and love. She would grow up wanted and cherished, with parents who would never let the system shuffle her around like a problem to be solved. Marcus touched his torn jacket where the coyote had grazed him. The wound was shallow but would leave a scar. He decided he didn't mind. Some scars were worth having, especially when they came from doing something that mattered. As Sarah's husband reached them and took in the scene, his wife holding their newborn daughter, a bleeding teenager standing guard over them both, Marcus began to gather his things. It was time to disappear back into the mountains. But this time, he wouldn't be running from something. He would be walking toward whatever came next, carrying the knowledge that he had made a difference. In a world that had told him he was unwanted, he had just proven that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are exactly what the situation demands. "Wait!" Sarah called out as Marcus shouldered his backpack and prepared to leave. "Please don't go!" Her husband David had reached them and was kneeling beside his wife and newborn daughter. The park rangers were busy checking Sarah's vital signs and preparing her for transport to the hospital. In all the activity, Marcus had hoped to slip away unnoticed. "Sarah, we need to get you medical attention," David was saying, but his eyes kept drifting to the torn and bloodied teenager who had somehow saved his family. "This boy risked his life for us," Sarah told her husband, her voice gaining strength despite her exhaustion. "He fought off 3 coyotes and delivered our baby." David looked up at Marcus with new understanding. The scratches on the boy's face and arms, the torn clothing, the makeshift walking stick, it all painted a picture of incredible bravery. "What's your name, son?" David asked. "Marcus," he replied quietly, uncomfortable with the attention. "Marcus Torres." "Where are your parents, Marcus?" one of the rangers asked while preparing the stretcher. "They must be worried sick." Marcus felt the familiar knot form in his stomach. This was always the moment when things got complicated, when his story became someone else's problem to solve. "I don't have parents," he said simply. "I'm on my own." The ranger frowned. "How old are you?" 17. 18 in 2 weeks. Sarah struggled to sit up straighter, ignoring the ranger's protests about staying still. "You're living out here alone?" Marcus nodded. He had learned that the truth was usually easier than elaborate lies, even when it made people uncomfortable. "That's not right," Sarah said firmly. "David, we can't just leave him here." Her husband looked torn between concern for his wife and newborn and the obvious need of the young man who had saved them. "Sarah, we need to focus on getting you and Hope to the hospital. He comes with us," Sarah declared with the authority of someone who had just survived a life-threatening situation. "I'm not leaving him in these woods alone." The ranger who had been asking questions spoke up. "Ma'am, we'll need to contact social services. If he's a minor living on his own." "He's not going back into the system," Sarah interrupted, her nurse's instincts kicking in, as she recognized the look of panic that flashed across Marcus's face. "Not after what he's done for us." Marcus took a step backward. "It's okay, really. I'll be fine. I've been taking care of myself for months." But David was studying him with the eye of someone who understood responsibility and obligation. "No," he said finally, "Sarah's right. You're coming with us." The trip down the mountain was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. The rangers had called in a helicopter for Sarah and the baby, but Marcus found himself walking beside David Coleman, a successful attorney who seemed genuinely interested in his story. "So, you've been living in these mountains since you aged out of foster care early?" David asked as they navigated a particularly steep section of trail. "I didn't age out," Marcus admitted. "I left. Got tired of being moved around, tired of families who said they wanted to help but really just wanted the state payments." David was quiet for a moment. "That must have been incredibly difficult." Marcus shrugged. It was honest, at least. "Out here, if something wants to hurt you, it doesn't pretend to care about you first." The simple truth of that statement hit David hard. Here was a teenager who had been so failed by the adults in his life that he preferred the genuine danger of wild animals to the false promises of the foster care system. At the hospital, Marcus waited in the emergency room while doctors examined his wounds. The coyote scratches needed cleaning and bandaging, but nothing required stitches. A social worker appeared, clipboard in hand, ready to process him back into a system he had rejected. But Sarah Coleman was not a woman to be underestimated. From her hospital bed, she made phone calls. Her husband made others. By evening, they had arranged for Marcus to stay in a guest room at their house while a more permanent solution was worked out. "You don't understand," Marcus tried to explain to them. "I'm not good at the family thing. Every time someone tries to help me, it ends badly." "Then maybe you haven't met the right family yet," Sarah said, holding baby Hope while she slept. "You saved our lives, Marcus. The least we can do is give you a place to figure out what comes next." The Coleman house was everything Marcus had dreamed about during his years in group homes and temporary placements. It was warm, stable, and filled with the kind of casual affection that he had only seen in movies. David worked from a home office, handling environmental law cases. Sarah took maternity leave from her nursing job to care for Hope, but Marcus struggled with the transition. He woke up at dawn out of habit, checked the windows for escape routes, and kept his few possessions packed in his backpack. Trust was not something he could simply decide to feel. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later. Marcus was helping David prepare dinner when Sarah's scream cut through the house. They rushed to the nursery to find her holding Hope, who was blue-faced and struggling to breathe. "She's choking," Sarah said, her professional calm cracking with maternal panic. Without hesitation, Marcus took the infant from her arms. He had learned basic first aid during his wilderness survival research. His finger carefully cleared Hope's airway while he positioned her face down on his forearm, supporting her head with his hand. 5 sharp blows between her shoulder blades dislodged whatever had been blocking her breathing. Hope let out a healthy cry, her color returning to normal as oxygen flooded her system. Sarah and David stared at Marcus in amazement. Once again, the boy they had taken in had saved their daughter's life. "How did you know to do that?" Sarah asked, taking Hope back and holding her close. "I researched everything I might need to know to survive on my own," Marcus said quietly, "including medical emergencies." David put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You know, son, I think it's time we made this arrangement official." The adoption process took 6 months. Marcus turned 18 during the waiting period, but he chose to go through with it anyway. For the first time in his life, he wanted to belong somewhere. The legal papers were signed on a crisp morning in early spring. Marcus Torres became Marcus Torres Coleman, finally having a last name that meant something to him. The hyphen was his idea, a bridge between the boy he had been and the man he was becoming. As they left the courthouse, Hope riding in her carrier and babbling happily, Marcus looked back at the building where his life had officially changed. Inside those walls, a judge had declared that he was no longer alone in the world. "Any regrets?" David asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. Marcus considered the question seriously. The mountains still called to him sometimes. He missed the simplicity of survival, the honest relationship between effort and reward that wilderness life provided. But he had learned something important in the months since Hope's birth. Family wasn't just about blood relations or legal documents. It was about people who showed up when you needed them, who trusted you with their most precious things, who saw your potential even when you couldn't see it yourself. "No regrets," Marcus said, reaching over to adjust Hope's blanket as they walked to the car. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." 5 years later, Marcus graduated from college with a degree in emergency medicine and wilderness rescue. He had started a non-profit organization that trained at-risk youth in survival skills and outdoor leadership. The program was specifically designed for kids aging out of the foster care system, giving them practical skills and confidence they could carry into adulthood. His adoption story had been featured in several magazines, but Marcus was careful to keep the focus on the larger issue of foster care reform, rather than on his own heroic moment. He knew that most kids in the system would never get the chance to save someone's life in such a dramatic way, but they all deserved families who would fight for them the way the Colemans had fought for him. Hope was now a bright 5-year-old, who called him Uncle Marcus and insisted on accompanying him on his easier hiking trips. She had no memory of the day he had helped bring her into the world, but she seemed to understand instinctively that their bond was special. On quiet evenings when the family gathered in the living room after dinner, Marcus would sometimes catch David or Sarah looking at him with expressions of pride and love. It still surprised him, even after all these years, that he had ended up here. The orphan boy who had once preferred the honest danger of wild animals to the false promises of adults had learned something that no survival guide could teach. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is trust someone. But sometimes it's also the only thing that can save you. Marcus had risked everything to help a stranger in the wilderness, never imagining that the real rescue was still to come. The woman whose baby he had delivered would become the mother who chose him. The man whose family he had saved would become the father who taught him that home wasn't a place you found, but a place you built with people who refused to give up on you. And the tiny girl whose first breath he had witnessed would grow up calling him family, never knowing that she had saved his life just as surely as he had saved hers.